Hey guys, how's it going? Connor here today at eTrailer.com. We're going to be taking a look at the Airlift LoadLifter XL air springs here for our 2016 Ford F-250. Now, in order to show you the benefits our air springs are going to have on our F-250 here, we're going to go ahead and take some measurements for you. The measurements we're going to be taking are from the ground to the top inside edge of our wheel well with the factory suspension and our truck completely unloaded. So we're going to do this now for the rear. And we're going to get about 41.5 inches. Now we're going to head to the front. And for the front, we're going to have about 41 inches from the ground to the top inside edge of our wheel well here. So now that we have our factory suspension unloaded, we have those measurements, we're going to go ahead and place the load in the bed of our truck, and we're going to retake our measurements here to see how much they changed. Keep in mind, we just have the factory suspension now. We're going to go ahead and retake our measurements. So for the rear here, from the ground to the top center of the wheel well here, we're going to have about 39 inches. So it looks like the rear end of our truck went down about 2.5 inches. Now let's come to the front here and retake our front measurement. Looks like we're about 41.5 inches. Therefore, the front of the truck came up about 1/2 inch. Now I know what you're probably thinking. 1/2 inch of difference doesn't seem like a whole lot, but believe it or not, this is going to have quite drastic effects on our vehicle while we're towing. Number one, our tires aren't going to have the correct factory camber, therefore we're going to have problems with irregular tire wear. Another issue we're going to have here is that our headlights are going to be pointed more up towards the sky, therefore we're going to be blinding other motorists on the road, and we're also not going to have the best visibility. And last but not least, our stopping power is going to be reduced quite drastically here since we have the weight transferred more to the rear axle. Now the factory braking is going to be about 60% in the front and 40% of the rear. So you can imagine the effects that can have once we take the weight off the front axle and transfer it more towards the rear. So in regards to the rear of the truck, as we remembered, we went down about 2.5 inches. And this is actually quite severe. The number one thing we're going to notice is we're going to be stressing our factory suspension more. Therefore, we're going to definitely have a worse ride. It's going to be a lot more bumpy and it's not going to be nearly as stable. Also, the factory suspension, since it is being stressed more, it's definitely going to wear down quicker, and we're going to be replacing the existing components sooner than we should be. So now that we've given you a visual here of what this weight is going to do to our pickup, let's go ahead and take it on the test course and show you how it handles. We're going to go over a couple test courses here at eTrailer. The first one is going to be our speed bump course. So we're going to get up to speed and go over a series of these speed bumps. So yeah, we can definitely feel that weight sort of jolting us around a little bit. It is a pretty bumpy ride, and in turn with this, it's also grabbing our steering wheel and sort of shooting it one way or the other. So now we're going to head on over here to our slalom course. We're going to do some evasive maneuvering at a constant speed. And just the first couple maneuvers here, we can definitely feel that weight just sort of shifting around back there. It's giving us a little bit of a body roll. And then when we do want to come to a stop, it is starting to push us a little bit in the truck here, which we notice. That's going to be the decreased braking power we have since we don't have as much weight on the front axle. So now that we have our airbags installed, let's go ahead and retake our measurements here. So in the rear, if you remember the first time, we got about 41.5 inches. So it looks like we're right back to that factory mark there. Let's go ahead and head over to the front. If you remember the first time, we were at 41 inches in the front. And again, we're right back to the factory ride height. So now that we've got back to factory ride height, we're not going to have any issues with our irregular tire wear or our headlights pointing up in the air, blinding others and reducing our visibility. As you can see now, we're pretty level, even with the weight in the bed of our truck. Therefore, we're not going to have to worry about the stability issues that we would have if we weren't level. And also, we're not going to have to worry about our existing factory suspension components wearing out as soon. So now let's go head back out on our test course so we can show you the difference the airbags make. So now we're going to go over our bump course here. Yeah, right away, right with that first couple bumps there, it's definitely a little bit more smoother. You can definitely tell a difference in that. Our steering wheel doesn't seem to be jolting as much side to side. And overall, it just feels a little bit more stable. Now we're over here at our slalom course. We're going to try to replicate the same speed that we were going before the airbags were installed. Yeah, and on these first couple turns here, we're not feeling the body roll near as much. It's definitely a huge improvement as far as that aspect goes. Our steering is definitely more responsive as well. Now we're going to get up to speed here. Just do a hard stop here. Now that we have more weight on the front axle, we should definitely feel our brakes a little bit more. Yeah, we certainly do. So our airlift air helper springs here are going to be an excellent option for our F-250. They're going to give us additional support when we're towing or hauling heavy loads. As you can see here, we have the factory jounce springs that our airbags replace. And right away you can tell there's a huge difference here. Now some of the benefits you would experience here from these airbags when compared to the factory jounce spring are, you're definitely not going to get near as much sag as you would because you don't have to reach a threshold before your jounce springs engage. Our air springs are going to engage automatically, and the best part of all is we can adjust the PSI inside the airbags to suit any given load we have. Therefore, we're going to get the perfect combination of support and comfort. So there are definitely a few suspension enhancement options for our F-250 here to give support when we're towing. However, I truly feel these airbags are going to be the best option because, as stated, none of the other systems are going to be adjustable like the airbags will. Therefore, again, we're going to be able to get the perfect level of support and comfort by adjusting the PSI depending on which trailer or what load we're hauling at the time. So our airlift air springs we have here in particular are the XL model. And what this means is it's going to give us 7,500 pounds of support compared to the 5,000 pounds of support that these standard duty options offer. Now keep in mind, these do not increase the payload capacity of your vehicle. So in regards to installation, this is definitely going to be something you can do at home by yourself. It's pretty straightforward. We don't have to make any permanent modifications to the vehicle, and we really don't need any special tools either. Therefore, this is definitely something you're going to be able to do by yourself at home with just some jack stands. So now that we've gone over some of the benefits and features, let's jump right into installation and show you how it's done. So the first step of our installation is we need to go ahead and raise our truck by the frame so we can let our axle hang freely. And we're actually going to be removing the spare tire as well, but this is just to give you a better view of what we're doing. Keep in mind this is not required for you at home. So once we're under the vehicle here, as you can see, we have this large heat shield here, which is going to block some access to our airbag. Now again, this isn't required, but it is going to make installation a little bit easier. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take a 13mm socket. We're going to remove 2 bolts we see here, as well as 2 nuts on the back side of this bracket. So first, we need to start by removing our factory jounce springs, which you can see are these yellow bumpers here. And before we do this, we're going to go ahead and soak our bolts in some penetrating oil just to help them be a little bit easier to remove. There's going to be a stud running through this jounce spring here. We have a nut on top. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 15mm wrench. We're going to get that nut off. Now this side is a little tight because of this wiring harness, so we're just going to be using a ratcheting wrench to remove it. On the other side, you can, however, get away with a socket and ratchet. So our nut's pretty tight. What we're doing is we're just going to loop 2 wrenches together to get a little bit more leverage so we can break that nut free. Now that we've got it broken free, we should be able to come back and get the rest of the way out by hand. Keep in mind, once we get to a certain point on the stud here, we're actually going to have to hold our jounce bumper up in place in order to stop it from spinning with our nut. So as we get to a certain point here, as we mentioned, the bump stop is going to end up spinning with our nut. So what we need to do is there's going to be a metal stop that's attached to the bump stop. There's going to be a hole in the frame. So we're going to have to push up on our bump stop here to align the tab with the hole. Then we can hold the bump stop in place and finish removing our nut. just like that. So we're going to be starting on the driver's side frame rail here. And as you can see, we have a bunch of wiring harnesses here that are going to get in the way when we're installing our upper bracket. So we're going to have to move some of these out of the way. There's going to be a white tab here that we can push in to release this from the bracket here, just like that. And also, if we want, we can go ahead and disconnect this wiring harness here. It's going to be a tab on the other end. We're just going to have to pull out. Just like that. Set this wiring harness aside. Don't forget, we do need to reconnect this when we're done. And now we're just going to do our best to try to move these existing lines out of our way. So now that we have this wiring harness out of the way, with our blue electrical tape around here, we have one more connector we need to undo. We see we have this little bracket here, which is holding these two lines against the frame rail. We actually need to remove this. So there's going to be a little push fastener on the inside that we want to push with a flat blade screwdriver or a pry tool, or we can use our finger and we just pull out like so to get it away from the frame rail here. So the next step of our installation here is going to vary a little bit. If you don't have a fifth wheel hitch already installed, or you have the factory Ford fifth wheel hitch installed, then you don't need to worry about this next step. However, if you have an aftermarket fifth wheel hitch installed like we do here, we're going to need to remove the side plates that attach the rails to the frame before we can move on to the next step with our airbags. So the next step of our installation here, we want to grab our driver's side upper airbag bracket, which we're going to see differentiates itself from the passenger side. So we can see the passenger side has that square opening there. Our driver's side has the two holes here. So that's how we know we have the right bracket. And once we get our driver's side bracket, what we need to do is there's going to be a little L bracket, which is included with this kit. We need to go ahead and attach this to the upper frame bracket here using our 1/4 inch hardware. So we want to start with our 1/4 inch hex bolt. We want to install a flat washer. And we're going to place that through that hole on our L bracket, then follow it up on the other side with a flat washer, a nylock nut, and then we're just going to snug everything up using our 11mm wrench and ratchet. So now that we have our L bracket attached to our upper air spring bracket, we can go ahead and attach this to the frame now. We're going to be using the bolt that we removed our brace from, which holds the emission lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our M8 bolt that's included with the kit. We're going to put a flat washer on there first. Then we're going to go ahead and mount this up on the frame. May need to push some lines out of the way. Then we're going to come around back with our flat washer and our nylock nut. We're just going to loosely install this for now. So now that we have our upper air spring bracket in position, we can go ahead and attach our line holder bracket to the L bracket that we installed just a little bit ago. So go up, we're just going to push it down into that bracket just like so. And here you can get a better look at the line holder clip attached to the L bracket on our upper air spring bracket. So now that we have our line holder attached to the L bracket, we can go ahead and tighten down our 1/4 inch hardware that's used to attach the L bracket to our upper air spring bracket. So if you remember what our driver's side upper airbag brace looked like, there was going to be sort of a notch on the other side of this bracket here. There's also going to be an oval hole that's going to line up with on our frame rail. So we're going to go ahead and insert a bolt into this. We're going to be using our 1/2 inch hex bolt here. We're going to be using a 1/2 inch flat washer. And then we're going to slide that through the hole in our frame and through the bracket, sandwiching the two together. And then on the outside of our frame rail, we're going to come back with our other 1/2 inch flat washer as well as our flange nut, just to hold everything in place. We're not torquing anything down at the moment. We're just loosely installing our hardware. We also want to make sure that we're not pinching any of our lines between the frame and our bracket. Here's a closer look at the 1/2 inch hex bolt that we just installed on the other side of the frame bracket. So the next part of our installation here, we want to go ahead and get our airbags ready. and assemble those so they'll be all set when we go to install them on the vehicle. So what we want to do is we want to take the top side of our airbag here. You're going to see we have the inflation valve port. We're going to take one of our roll plates. We want to make sure the rounded edge is going to be pointing down, and we're just going to line up all our holes here loosely. We can take one of our elbow airline fittings. We're just going to thread this into the inflation port hand tight. Once we get it hand tight, we want to come back with a 9/16 inch wrench. We want to give it about 1.5 inch turns, just so we start to see the thread tape engage. Just like that. Now the next step of our installation here, we want to take our lower bracket plate here, as well as our lower bracket cup. What we want to do is we're going to attach the two together. In order to do this, we're going to get our 5/16 inch carriage bolt. We're going to place it through the hole on our lower bracket cup. There's got another slotted hole on our lower bracket plate here that's going to line up like that. Then we can flip it around to the other side. You can follow this up with our 5/16 inch flat washer and our 5/16 inch lock nut. Now we can go ahead and tighten down our 5/16 inch hardware using a 13mm socket. So keep in mind, we want to make sure we can still swivel the bracket when we're tightening down our carriage bolt here. So now that we have our lower air spring cup attached to our lower air spring plate here, we can go ahead and begin the next step, which is to install our carriage bolts. For this, we're going to need our longer 3/8 inch carriage bolt. We're also going to need our smaller 5/16 inch carriage bolt. As you can see on the bottom of the plate here, we have 4 square holes for our carriage bolts. We need to be careful when choosing these holes because there's going to be different sets depending on which side of the vehicle we're working on. Since we're starting on the driver's side, we're going to place the longer carriage bolt through this hole, and then our smaller carriage bolt through this hole here. So now that we have our carriage bolts in place on our lower air spring plate here, we can go ahead and attach our bag. Keep in mind that we need the port on the air spring to be opposite of our swivel here, of our bracket that holds our lower cup. In order to do this, we do need to use a roll plate, so we're going to just place that roughly into position now. Keep in mind there's going to be a few different sets of bolt holes we need to use here. Since we're on the driver's side, we're going to be using these two. The passenger side, we'll use those two. And if you ever get confused, you can always just defer to the instructions. So I'm going to go ahead and set the roll plate in place now to loosely align the holes here. Once that's in place, you're going to take our Allen head screws, which come with our kit. We're going to need a 7/32 inch Allen key. We're going to try to line everything up. Come to the back side here. Install our Allen bolt as best we can. May need to rotate the plate a little bit. To get everything to line up. Now that we have both screws snug, we can go ahead and come back with our torque wrench here and torque down everything to the value supplied in the instructions. So now that we have our air spring installed on the lower bracket plate here, we can move on to the upper plates. So as you can see here, we have 2 plates in front of us. One is going to be for the driver's side. One is going to be for the passenger side. As you can see, they're quite a bit of a different shape, so it should be easy to distinguish the two. Now we want to take our 5/16 inch carriage bolts here. We're going to be using 2 different lengths. We're going to be using the 1¼ inch length as well as a 2 inch length. We're simply going to take these smaller ones and insert them through these rearward holes here, just like so. Then we're going to take our larger 2 inch one, install it in that forwardmost hole there. Now before we set our upper plate here on the air spring, what we're going to do to stop our carriage bolts from falling out is we're just going to take some tape here. We're going to tape our bolt heads down so they don't come backing out. just like that. So now we want to go ahead and start to assemble all of our brackets to our air spring. Keep in mind, we want to reinstall our upper roll plate here. Make sure we align everything. Then we can go ahead and install the plate that we just assembled with our carriage bolts. Keep in mind this flat edge needs to be facing out away from the air spring. Just going to line it up like so. Now we can come back with our 3/8 inch hex bolts here. You can see they're very fine thread. We're going to be installing first a lock washer, then a flat washer. And those are going to be used to secure everything together. Now we can take our 14mm socket and torque down these 2 hex bolts here to the value supplied in the instructions. So now the last part of our air spring assembly here is to install our spacer block on this longer 2-inch carriage bolt. Keep in mind this is offset in regards to where the bolt hole is. The spot with more material, if you will, on the outside is going to go away from the airbag, just like so. So now that we have everything assembled, we can go ahead and place this up into position on the vehicle. So for our longer carriage bolt here, we need to make sure we're outside of the hard brake line there. We may have to tilt things, we may need to compress the airbag a little bit. It is going to be a tight fit, but we should be able to get it in there. So now that we have our driver's side assembly into position, we want to go ahead and assemble the passenger side and set that up into place on the vehicle, and then we can go ahead and install our remaining components and tighten everything down. So now that we have our passenger side air spring in place, we can go ahead to our driver's side and start to button everything up. The first thing we're going to tighten down is going to be the 2-inch carriage bolt that goes through the factory hole that was used for our jounce stop. So we're going to take our 3/8 inch flange bolt, which is included with the kit, and thread that on now, and then tighten it down. To tighten it down, we're going to need a 9/16 inch socket. We may also need to move some of our existing wires out of the way. Keep in mind, while we're tightening down this flange nut, we want to check on the outside to make sure our spacer block is flush against the frame. And here's just to give you a better shot of our spacer block, and as we can see, it's flush to the bottom of the frame rail here. So now we can finish securing these top 2 carriage bolts here using our 3/8 inch flat washer on each, and coming back with our 3/8 inch Nylox nuts. And we're actually going to be torquing these down. We're going to need a 9/16 inch socket for these. Once we have those 2 torqued down, we can go ahead and repeat this process on the passenger side of the vehicle, securing all the hardware that attaches the upper brackets to the frame rail. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to secure the upper air spring brackets to our frame rail here. We're going to be starting on the driver's side with the 8mm bolt. We're going to need a 17mm socket and wrench in order to tighten this. So last but not least, we have our 1/2 inch bolt on the outside of our bracket here, which we need to tighten using a 19mm socket and wrench. So once we have our 2 bolts tightened that's securing the upper air spring bracket to the frame, we're going to go ahead and re-secure all our wires making sure to reconnect any wires we may have unplugged. Then we can go ahead and repeat this process on the passenger side of the vehicle. We're going to install our U-bolts here, which is going to pin our lower bracket to the leaf spring stack here. Before we do that, however, we want to lift up on our air spring. We want to make sure the bracket is going to be flush all the way to the leaf spring stack here. So we're just going to lift up like so. Just make sure we're all the way against the leaf spring stack there. Once we are, we can take our U-bolt here. We're going to be using the uppermost hole on our bracket, so we want to guide that around on both sides. Just like that. Now we can come back with our 3/8 inch flat washers, followed up with our 3/8 inch lock nuts. Now we're just going to go ahead and tighten down both of our bolts here using our 9/16 inch socket. Keep in mind we do need to alternate back and forth between sides. So now that we have our U-bolts secure, we're going to finally install our axle strap bracket here. Before we do this, we need to take our other 10-inch long carriage bolt here and insert it through the open square hole on the back side of our flat plate here. Just like that. Then we can take our axle strap bracket and align our holes here. Press that up against the axle, and then we're going to follow this up with our 3/8 inch flat washers and nylock nuts. And now we can begin to tighten these down. We are going to want to alternate side to side and make sure that our axle strap bracket comes up evenly. Now we're going to reach a point here where even our deep well socket isn't going to be able to tighten this anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back with a 9/16 inch wrench and finish these off. So we are actually going to need to torque down our nylock nuts here that are attached to our carriage bolt. So what we need to do at this time, we need to go ahead and trim off some of our excess U-bolt. We're going to be using a Sawzall here. If you have a hacksaw on hand, that'll probably be a little bit easier for you. Now once we have both of these torqued down, we can go ahead and repeat this process on the other side. So keep in mind, on the passenger side of our vehicle here, we actually don't need to tighten down our axle strap bracket evenly, and that's because we have a hard brake line here on the rear of the axle tube. We need to be careful not to crush. So now we're going to jump back over to the driver's side of the vehicle here, and we need to zip tie some of our wires and lines away from our airbags so we don't have any issues with them rubbing. As you can see, we already have one zip tie up here. We're going to put another one down here below for extra security. So now we need to come to the driver's side of the vehicle. Outside the frame rail here, we're going to see a 13mm bolt, which is used to hold this bracket up for our emergency brake cable. So we want to go ahead and remove that next. And once that's out, we can pull this out, pull that out, and then just forward this bracket, we have another one here sort of behind the fender well, if you will. That needs to come out as well. We can pull that one down as well. Now we can take our two extension brackets here and install those in place of the cables that we just removed. Before we get that all the way tightened, we're going to take our 5/16 inch hex bolts here, which are included with the kit, follow that up with a flat washer. We're actually going to use this to attach the cable to our secondary bracket there. Then on the back side, we're going to do another flat washer along with a nylock nut. And once we get all these started, we can go ahead and zip everything down with our 13mm socket and 13mm wrench. Now finally, if you remember, we actually have one little carriage bolt on the bottom plate for our driver's side air spring bracket. We're going to be using this little clamp here that comes with the kit, wrapping it around the emergency brake cable, and then we're going to use that and secure it up to this carriage bolt here using our included 5/16 inch flat washer and nylock nut. So now we're going to go ahead and find a place to mount our inflation valves. Now we have a couple different options for this. Most people will drill a couple small holes up here in the license plate area so we can run our inflation valves through there. However, I don't want to drill any holes in the truck. So what we're going to be using an additional no drill mounting bracket, which can be had through eTrailer.com here, but keep in mind it doesn't come with the kit. And basically what this does is we're going to use a little band clamp here to secure this to the hitch receiver tube. Then we're going to have a couple holes on the bottom here. We're going to drill those out so we can run our inflation valves through there, and then we can run the air lines back to each bag. So as you can see here, we have our no drill mounting bracket attached to our trailer hitch. We enlarged two of the holes here to mount our inflation valves. Then we have the air lines coming around back, ran to each of the airbags. So you can see here we have our air lines coming from the back of the inflation valves. We came back over the spare tire center section here, came above here. We have a zip tie up at the front here to an existing wiring harness to hold it in place. We came along here. There's a factory hole in this little cross section here that I have it zip tied to. And this is where we need to be careful because we're right by the exhaust. So we actually have a little heat shield that goes over the air line that comes with our kit. Just make sure you use that right here by the exhaust pipe. And then we have it gone into the fitting to our airbag. So before we wrap up our installation here, we have one final component we need to install, which is our heat shield here. We're going to need to set that on the inside of our exhaust pipe here to shield this from our airbag. So what we want to do is simply just take our heat shield here. We're going to bend these tabs in a little bit, just like so. We don't need a whole lot. And what we can do is go ahead and place this up in the position we want it to. Then we can take our band clamps here. Keep in mind you do have two sizes. Essentially going to sandwich the heat shield to the exhaust pipe here. You may need to get it started, and then we can slide our heat shield back up into place. So now that we have everything set up, next thing we're going to do is we're going to put some air in each of our bags here. And we're going to do a leak test with a soapy water solution that essentially just entails spraying down all our lines and fittings to make sure we don't have any bubbles. So now that we have our system filled with air, we can go ahead and spray down all of our fittings and lines so we can check for leaks. What we're going to be looking for is rapid forming bubbles, as that would indicate we have a leak. So again, we just want to spray down all the lines and fittings with our soapy water solution just to make sure we're all good. And that's going to do it today for the look and installation of our Airlift LoadLifter XL air helper springs here for our 2016 Ford F-250.